To flood every winter, but last summer that land was underwater. This winter he's feeding his cows on silage, meal and straw. But early last summer, that wasn't Frank Hughes's plan at all.
Well, I set out to make hay, and then I cut about 4 acres of hay and started to turn and work at it, and turned it several times, and then lost it. Got the letter, and I baled one field and had to draw it into the corner of the field. The other field then rotted on the ground. So I waited on then to September, waiting to see what the weather picked up then. I started to make silo then. Got about 6 acres of silo made. Then the ground was that wet that the machinery started to sink in it. So I had to abandon that too.
So what feed did you get for the winter in the end?
Well, I just got about 6 acres of silo made, and that was all the feed I had then.
So then you had to go out and buy?
I had to buy 68 bales of round bales. It cost me £1,028. So.
And what about meal?
Well, I reckon it'll take about £700 or £800 to put me over the winter. That's £1,000 that I had to pay for straw. I wouldn't usually have to give that for any other year. I might have to buy maybe 300 or 400 bales any other year.
What about meal? Your meal must be up a lot.
Meal would be up about £300 or £400 this year.
How do you think you're getting on with the cows now? How much meal are you feeding, and are you satisfied with the way the cows are?
Well, I'm fairly well satisfied with the condition that they're in. I'm given, this last few days now, I've started to double up on the meal. I'd be given about £8 a meal a day. So I'm just hoping that they'll keep in fairly good condition, the cows, for calving later on in February and March.
Well, Frank is typical of the many small farmers in this county who are dependent on hay for their winter fodder. He tried to save his hay, he lost it, he salvaged what was left of it as silage. And that wasn't going to be enough winter feed, so he took the advice. He bought big bales of straw and supplemented it with meal.
Of course, the winter has cost him a fair bit of money.
Oh, it has. In Frank's case, it's £2,500. And to a small farmer, that's a lot of money.
And he has lost some milk yield as well, and will possibly lose some milk yield in the coming lactation.
Yeah, his cows are a little bit thin. He's feeding £5 a meal about, and he should be feeding a bit more. So milk yield will be down next spring.
But of course, it's all right to talk about feeding a bit more. It all costs money.
Oh, I can fully understand why Frank's not feeding more.
Tessie Boyd milks 10 cows and normally rears his calves to sell at 1.5 years. When he failed to save most of his hay last summer, he had to sell all his young stock before the winter. He got some hay saved, but it was very bad. Other grass that was cut for hay eventually finished up in bags as silage. His is a familiar story of the summer of 1985.
Well, the weather got that bad, and I cut the most of it, and then I seen I was going to lose it all, and decided to go and get into the big bale, and it's the first time around here. And then the ground was that wet I couldn't get all made.
So did you get, how much of it did you get into big bales?
Well, 54 big bales.
How much hay did you lose?
About 600. 600 bales.
600 small bales?
Yes.
So how are you fixed for the winter? What else did you have to, what did you have to buy?
Well, I bought 30 bales of straw, and I've thinned out my stock, and I sold off replacement heifers that normally would have been keeping. And
well, do you think you're all right for the winter now?
Well, I hope so, but I'll not have anything over.
So you're hoping for an early spring?
Well, I'm hoping it'll be a good winter.
What are you actually feeding those cows now?
Well, they're getting, I don't know, they're a big scoopful twice a day each, and some pure hay and silage after, and molasses on on top of the old hay.
Actually, they're looking in quite good condition.
Well, I hope they are.
Tacey's is another example of a man who had a problem. He couldn't get his hay, and he solved it by saving at his big bale silage. And it has worked extremely well for Tacey's. His bales have turned out very good, and his cows are eating them all. He has absolutely no waste. So it's a very happy situation for him. He's feeding meal with his cows, and the cows are in fine condition, in fact, and I think they should do very well.
Have you any general observation to make about farms, these farms that would have mostly hay and might be left with a lot of bad hay at this time?
Well, the biggest thing I see is that the quality of the roughage is poor, and they have to feed meal with it. Otherwise, the cows will get very thin, and they can't milk very well with that.
Of course, there is a danger about bumping up the meal too much at this stage.
Oh, this is a very serious one, because if you have cows coming near calving and they're very thin, if you feed a lot of meal too suddenly, you'll end up with big calves and very difficult calving. So this is something to be avoided, and especially in heifers.
Seamus Murphy, farming near Carcahan in County Monaghan, has half his 50 acres more than a mile from home. With help from neighbours and a big baler, he got his grass cut and bagged as silage. The silage was made during a storm, and the day I was there, it was being brought home in another storm.
When the end of June weather got very bad, and then the hay that was cut was lost, really. It might have been gathered up, but was lost because every week got worse. And what hay was cut, well, it was got in very poor condition. So it left us, we had to turn to silage. Though our land isn't very suitable here, it's very hilly. And we had to think of some way or other of getting the silage. So bale silage was our only hope.
Because you wouldn't be able to run the machinery on the hills and on the very wet land.
That's right. You wouldn't get out of the fields and that, and on the wet land it wasn't suitable.
Well, that was quite an expensive job.
It was, yes. It cost us around £80 an acre to make the silage. We lost all the aftergrass, and the cows had to come in with the wet in August. We had to take them in and start feeding the meal to them. Next, they're £6 or £8 a day a meal.
So we're talking about adding quite a lot of money together. Could you put figures on that for me?
It would cost the harvest in winter around £100 per cow extra with the bad feeding. The bad summer was the cause of that.
And is that including the price of straw that you bought?
No, no, it's not. The straw's extra. I had to buy 500 bales, square bales of straw, and 42 bales, round bales of straw, which cost me around £2,500.
So at the end of the day, or at the end of the winter, what will 1985 have cost you?
It'll have cost me about 4,500 extra, 4,500 to 5,000 extra on meal and straw.
And I take it you lost some milk yield as well?
Oh, we did indeed. We lost 150 gallons at least over the 85 summer, with the wet weather and cows having to come in so early.
How do you feel about the year coming up? The cows are a little bit on the thin side, and that's hardly surprising, I suppose.
They are. Much on the thin side with the bad summer. They're far thinner than we would like them to be. And indeed, we lost another 100 to 150 gallons of milk in the summer ahead, in the 86 summer.
So how do you feel you came out of it in the end? I mean, you've actually survived and you've actually handled it. Are you satisfied with what you did?
Well, we have survived, as you say, and handled it, but I wouldn't think we'll come out too good. But it'll cost us, I suppose, at the end of 86, will be at least 6,000 extra cost. So I wouldn't think you wouldn't be counting that too good.
Well, considering everything, I think Seamus got himself out very well, but at a cost, as he outlined to you. This is a 25 cow herd, and normally in this part of the world, that size of a herd would be on silage. But Seamus's farm is fragmented, and he takes the hay from the outlying land. But because it's so steep, he couldn't cut silage off it. So he had to settle for big bale silage this year.
He got on fairly well with his big bales. How did big bales work out in general?
Yeah, the results were very variable. Seamus got good bales, but some people got disappointing results. There were failures for various reasons. Some of the material was too wet going in. That was the biggest fault. Some of them were a bit late to seal it. And, of course, there was a bit of vermin damage from birds and rats and so forth.
In other words, broken bags and then rotting taking place inside them?
Yes, anything that the air got at failed.
What are the big disadvantages with bales? There's that danger, and I suppose there's cost.
Yeah, it's not a cheap system by any means. And of course, they're difficult to handle, particularly where people have small tractors. And the sort of people who'd be making big bales would have small tractors that mightn't fit to carry one of those bales.
A lot of cows around and about are a bit on the thin side, quite understandably. What do you think farmers can do about that, and what do you think the consequences of it are going to be?
Well, the consequences of cows calving thin is lower milk yield. It will depress milk yield by upward on 200 gallons per cow. And there's not very much they can do at this late stage if they're coming near calving, you know, so that there'll be a lot of extra cost in meat feeding in the springtime.
Owen Connolly has 41 cows and a lot of really high yielders among them. Last summer he had his own forage harvester and admits that he might have lost a cut without it. His silage is wet, but with easy feeding the cows are getting enough of dry matter intake. To save silage, heifers are being fed straw, molasses and meal.
Well, we got on fairly good. We just had about 2 or 3 interruptions with the rain.
You were very lucky then and very unusual.
Yeah, well, I suppose the fact that we're our own harvester and joined with that neighbouring farmer, and we're fit to sort of start when the weather was good.
Well, did you get it cut at the right time?
Yeah, we did. We got the first cut on the 20th of May and the 2 further cuts at 6 weekly intervals. The biggest problem was wet ground. We had to bring the cows in the middle of August, and we had to increase the meal. Well, double it up at least. We're giving them about 12 pounds at that stage per day to keep them the milk yield up and keep the body condition on the cows.
And did you have to go into your silage at that stage?
Oh, I was feeding silage from mid-August.
Did that worry you that you were going to run out of silage?
Well, it did slightly. It meant that we had to buy straw for the replacement heifers. We thought maybe we wouldn't have enough, but I think we're going to have enough now.
You have cows looking extraordinarily well. What are you feeding to your cows pre-calving, and what are you feeding to them post-calving at the moment?
Well, pre-calving, they're just on silage alone from they were dried up, and post-calving, we intend feeding about 14 pounds of dairy nuts and about a midday feed of 6 pounds of beet pulp nuts.
It surprises me that your silage is good enough to put that sort of condition on cows, but obviously it must be good.
Yeah, it must be. We didn't get the result back of the test yet, but it must be fairly good. We have a herd average of about 1,300 gallon here. We have, I suppose, 10 or 12 of them cows given between 15 and 1,800 gallon.
So you have a very good herd indeed. So you're satisfied that you got out of 1985 without too many problems?
Yeah, apart from a bit of extra work with the cows inside for the 2 extra months, we hadn't that many problems.
And did you maintain your lactation?
We
or
did.
Your yield?
We increased it slightly, as a matter of fact.
But I think this is a very well managed spring calving dairy herd. The cows are in excellent condition, having been fed on silage alone all winter. The fact that he has gone over to an easy feed system this year, I think would contribute to that in a large way.
He must have got his silage pretty good, but you're putting the easy feed down that they're actually getting extra intake.
Oh yeah, the intake is very good. You see, this year silage dry matters are very low, and cows have to eat an awful lot more silage to get the dry matter intake required. And this means that many farmers are running short of silage. For instance, a pit of silage that would have done 170 days last year, if unrestricted this year, would do the same number of cows about 140 days.
What are the consequences of that going to be, and what is your advice going to be?
Well, that will mean that anybody who hasn't done a bit of restriction and fed meal will run out of silage before the cows go to grass.
So what's your advice to farmers now, particularly post-calving?
Well, even at this late stage, they must take stock of their silage and try and budget it out to the end of the season. And because the energy levels of silage this year are much lower, they're going to have to feed more meal. In fact, I reckon that from the analysis of silages, they're going to have to feed on average 4 pounds a day more to maintain the same milk yields that they had last year.
So we're talking about 20 pounds a meal to a good cow?
Oh, yes, indeed, and with the higher yielding herds, perhaps even more. Now, that's giving rise to problems already. There's this problem of acidosis. You see, when cows get a large feed of a starchy food, you get very rapid fermentation of the soluble carbohydrate, and this rapidly reduces the pH of the rumen, giving rise to this acidosis.
Is that with twice-a-day meal feeding?
Yeah, well, the way to overcome this, in fact, is if you have to feed a lot of meal, to break it up into 3 feeds or even 4 feeds. And indeed, I would recommend that the midday feed this year could be in the form of beet pulp. Owen Connolly is going to do this here, and I think it'll prove quite effective.
It's a very critical time now if your hay and silage supplies are running low. So even at this stage, it's well worthwhile talking to your advisor about budgeting your feed from now